I will continue to mute Google Hangouts when I make noise so as not to distract you guys, which is what I did last time.
That's fine. Okay, so do you want to sync the voice recorder and knock it out?
I am ready to go, and you are. You point and tell me.
3, 2, 1, hit it.
It's been hit.
All right.
You ready to go?
Yep, anytime you want.
I got to move this recorder window. You can't minimize the recorder window, which is super annoying.
Right.
And I want it where...
That's what happened to me last time.
I want it where I can't accidentally hit it. So let's put it up in the top left. It won't get hit up there.
I just put things over it.
That's what I just did. I put it in the top left of the the monitor I have Google Hangouts on. And
yeah, nice.
All right, here we go, kids.
Okay. Anytime you're ready.
All right. Hey, everybody. The Dynasty League Football Podcast is back. I am your host and the proud owner of a still sealed 1965 Kellogg cereal promotional Woody Woodpecker stuffed toy, Jeff Miller. And with me this week is the Bobby the Brain Heenan to my Andre the Giant, George Kritikos. How is it going, George?
It's going great, buddy. Episode 2.
Yeah, we're full on veterans. I think it's time to consider holding out for more money at this point.
Yeah, well, especially since Nick's not on, I think that's a good idea.
I think we have a lot stronger chance if we disclude Nick. I'm just saying. I don't really. Anyway, Nick is going to hear this for the first time, and we're going to get a very angry Voxer message from him, and that's okay. All right, we got a lot of territory to cover this week. We have a swell shindig of an interview with Rich Rebar from so many sites that I can't even remember. I have them all written down so I don't forget to leave out. As we've discussed a little bit in last week's podcast, I'm pretty sure Rich doesn't sleep. And if he does, I don't know how he has time to do all the things he does, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Before we do, something a little more somber. You know, we have a 6-foot hole that needs to be dug, a gravestone to be chiseled, a funeral to be held. It's time for the Dynasty Graveyard. Friends, family, and guy at the stoplight forced to listen to this because the car next to you has it turned up way too loud. After a tumultuous 2 NFL seasons that culminated this week and being dropped by his second agent in as many months, we are gathered here today to put the dynasty value of Johnny Manziel to rest. Johnny was a shooting star, a shining light, a bright beacon in the dark night, and a tattooed virtuoso with a proclivity for partying. Yes, his career was short, but it wasn't without its high points. We here at the Dynasty League Football Dynasty Podcast choose to remember Johnny for those moments of magnificence, so I've asked George to share a few such anecdotes. George, if you would, please.
Johnny was the first freshman to ever throw for 3,000 yards and rush for 1,000 yards in a season. He won the Heisman, the O'Brien, and the Manning Awards in the same season, the first to ever do so. He was drafted in the first round, traded up for after he texted a Browns quarterback coach that he was going to wreck the league. He wrecked the league, 5 for 8, 63 yards, with a 10-yard rushing TD in his first ever appearance. 8 starts overall, only 1 with multiple pass touchdowns, but he saved his best for last. 108 rushing yards in his final NFL game. And then he decided to miss the last game. And instead of showing up, he had a concussion. He partied in Las Vegas, and his new friends know him as Billy. A few of his other accomplishments: he showed a fake license to an officer when he was 19, claiming to be 21. He overslept at the Manning Passing Academy and was dismissed early. He was fined for flipping the bird during a preseason game. And who cannot forget him throwing a water bottle at a heckler, and just as you would expect, it was wide of the intended target. Jeff, would you like to share a few words from some loved ones?
Thank you, George. I know that was difficult for you to say. It was difficult for all of us to hear. But I think it, puts a little perspective on what Johnny had done in the NFL. And it's important to remember him for all of those things that he brought to us and the league. Because Johnny touched so many people in his short time with us, we thought it'd be appropriate to reach out to some of them for comments on the former Brown. Ex-NFL head coach Barry Switzer said, "I don't like his antics. I think he's an arrogant little prick. I've said that, and I'll say it again." When we reached out to Denny Carter at CDCarter13 on Twitter, he was kind enough to stop eating a bowl of unsalted almonds long enough to say, "My thoughts and prayers are with Hand-Size Twitter, who trumpeted Manziel as a great prospect based in large part on the size of his mitts. This is a dark day for Hand-Size Twitter, very dark indeed." Well said, Denny. An elderly lady playing video poker at a grocery store here in Las Vegas didn't seem to know who Johnny was, but she did say, "He's very handsome. I bet his parents are proud." "I bet they are too, ma'am. I bet they are too." Pat Thorman of Pro Football Focus was a little more positive, saying, "Those drugs he inexplicably didn't finish in those pictures were actually a ray of hope. Amazing self-control. Can't wait to ask him about it on Fish Tour this summer. I hope he leaves Gordon at home, though." We'd like to leave you with one last quote, this one from the man himself. Johnny once said, "Is it bad to admit it on..." We'll try that again. We'd like to leave you with one last quote, this one from the man himself. Johnny once said, "Is it bad to admit on Twitter that I'm a believer?" We all need something to believe in, Johnny. I just wish we could still believe in you. George, do you think we need to apologize to the good people that tuned in for a football podcast for what just happened there, or are we good to go on that?
I think, if anything, we've given them a little bit of hope by helping them move past a very troubled time.
That is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be that by being serious and football-y last week, we conned them. I mean, I hate to call listeners suckers, but
it's okay. They'll get used to
it. I hope so. Yeah, that won't be the first time we do something like that, I assure you. It might not be the first time this podcast. I guess there's only one way to find out. All right, on to some actual football, more or less. Let's talk about rankings. George and I are both rankers on dynastyleaguefootball.com. You can, if you're a subscriber, you can find those. If you're not a subscriber, shame on you. You should be, because you can also find those. We've found out quite by accident one day that we rank remarkably similarly to each other. George and I have talked about a lot of things over the time we've written together. One thing we've never really talked about is player value. So it's interesting that we wind up agreeing on so many guys. One theory is that we have sort of similar things that we look at. Obviously, we must if we're ranking guys the same way. So, George, why don't you talk a little bit about what you weigh, how you rank, what matters to you more, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I try to hinge it more on future performance, and that, can encompass a lot of things. So, situation obviously plays into that. Historical performance, age, I think, is even part of it when you think about, how much longer they're going to be in the league, how much data you have to come in with. One thing I don't look at as much, and maybe others rank a little bit more on this side, is I'm not as worried as much about trade value or market value when doing my rankings. I think that that's something that plays itself out a little bit because, the actual performance is going to dictate some of the trade value, the market value anyway. So for me, I try to look at it as, who do I want to own? What person, if I'm torn between two, would I rather have on my team, as opposed to this person may have more trade value in the open market. So that's kind of a general sense of how I try to look at it when I do mine.
When I do my rankings, this sounds very simple because it is. I start at number one and I look at the guy that I have at number two and I say, which would I rather have? And then I just go right down the list. I mean, that's, I think, basically a simple way of saying what you said. So I'm not thinking too much about trade value. We'll leave, I like to leave player value to ADP and other things. I don't know that it has a ton of discussion in rankings. And actually this was, I don't know if debate's the right word, but there was a big discussion about this in the DLF. We have a Voxer chat with all of the writers. And this came up, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, sometime during last season, perhaps, where we had a big rankings versus ADP discussion and what are the roles of each. And I was pretty adamant that rankings should be just who you like better, not who you value more. I don't, in terms of trade value or market value. And it sounds like we agree, and that probably obviously has a lot to do with why our rankings line up so much.
Well, I have a question. So
Yeah.
when you do your rankings, and maybe this will help also tell if we align, what are you drinking when you do your rankings?
Water. I'm a very healthy person, George. I would never drink bourbon while I do my rankings. The only way to get through rankings is to drink bourbon. I don't think I hate it when people say this, people on podcasts or in any walk of life. People don't understand how hard rankings are to do, though. It's a difficult thing. And it's not just difficult because you're trying to order, for example, wide receiver is maybe the toughest to rank top to bottom, simply because there are wide receivers in the 70s that you would own. There's not running backs in the 70s that you want to own too much. Wide receiver is really difficult to try to go back, to go through the whole thing. And it's like you'll have a guy as a wide receiver 5 that, maybe you like him as a wide receiver 3 or something. It's weird. It's like a hard mental thing to wrap your brain around. It's really difficult. So I definitely recommend whiskey. It also then, when you screw something up really bad, which you will do, it gives you a nice excuse. You can simply say, I was drinking. So, yeah.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I try to write comments for every player that I rank. And once in a while, I'll notice that there's like 14 R's in the comment. And then I'm like, oh, I might have just, accidentally put my elbow down when I was taking a drink. So probably shouldn't do that.
I think that's just careless. I mean, so I've noticed in some of your comments where you'll just insert random racist remarks sometimes, and I've always assumed you were drinking, and that's why you did that. That's not true.
Let's go with that. Yeah.
That's what I need to do. Start a rumor that George is racist on our second podcast together. I don't know what the problem with that could be. The comments to me with rankings, and that actually brings up a good point. Comments are at least as important as the rankings themselves. You can give a little bit of insight as to why you ranked somebody the way you ranked them. And I have comments on virtually every player that I have ranked, or at least I try to anyway. Sometimes the lower end guys. I mean, do we really need a comment on Matt Asiata?
I'll usually put like a 1-word comment like meh or nah. Not even really a word.
You just put like the letter T and move on to the next one, so you can at least looks good.
Yeah, so so the number's red, so at least looks like there's a comment there.
Perfect. So, what about this notion about ranking within a 3-year window? That's the 3-year window is a real popular one that people like to throw out there. Whenever somebody says that, I roll my eyes a little bit, and this is not a subtweet. This is not directed at anybody in particular. I don't think people say that. I think when people say that, they mean it, and they think that's how they do it. But if that was the case, rankings would look just vastly different than they really do, than it ends up practically being. To me, it's again, I try not to overthink it. I try to just, who would I like better? And I guess if that ranks inside of a window, fine. I think the real importance or the real meaning of that statement is don't overrate youth, which definitely, can be a problem. Like, for example, when George ranked Des Bryant 10th at wide receiver, as I'm pinning you down here, Amari Cooper 3rd and Des Bryant 10th. If you're ranking inside of a 3-year window, obviously that wouldn't happen. I don't really have a problem with that ranking. What do you think about that idea of ranking within windows?
I'm not against the idea of ranking in windows, but I guess where I would, I don't subscribe to one window, like it's 3 or it's 2 or it's 5 or whatever. What I've seen, though, I did an article last year on DLF talking about player lifetime value. And then I think Adam Harstead over at Football Guys did a very similar article, but had a very different approach. And we talked a lot about it. And, when you're rebuilding versus when you contend, you're going to put different weights on the most current year versus maybe year 2 or year 3 or year 4. So when I did 2 versions of it, one that was more kind of contending, one was more rebuilding. Contending kind of came out closer to a 3-year window in terms of he could have 10 years of value left, but that 10 years is worth about 3 years of absolute value because the later years just aren't weighted as heavily because you're not worried about those as much versus a rebuilding team. It's more like 5 or 6 years worth of value a young person's going to have. And it's more about how does their values, how does their scoring spread throughout kind of all the years. So I try to balance those out, but I definitely weight the current year heavier than I do other years. So even if it's like a 3 or 5 year window, I'm more concerned about 2016 than I'm concerned about 2018. So even if it is a 3 year window, year 3, it doesn't matter as much as year 1 in general.
That leads into something we'll touch on in just a second. What I want to say about youth is, for me, especially at the top of my rankings, it becomes, as much as anything, just a tiebreaker for me. So if you look at, for example, my wide receivers, I have Odell Beckham Jr. first, and Antonio Brown second, and Julio Jones third. And the reason I have Beckham first isn't necessarily because I think he's the best receiver in the NFL or he's the best bet. You know, I have some concerns about his ability to stay healthy for 16 games with hamstring issues. You know, that seems to be a recurring thing for him. But he is 4 years younger than Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. And that, you know, that does matter. So does that, you know, in that specific instance, I kind of throw that 3 year window or 5 year window or whatever the hell it might be out the window. And I say, okay, these guys are really close. They're all really exceptionally good. They can all win you your league. I'll take the young guy. And that's kind of how I approach it. It's the same reason that I have Hopkins and Allen Robinson 4th and 5th and Dez Bryant 6th. You know, do I think that Hopkins or A-Rob are going to outscore Dez this year or next year or the year after? No, not necessarily. But they're 5 or 6 years younger than he is, and that matters. So going back a little bit to what George was saying about youth and windows and everything else. Oh my Lord, I totally forgot what I was going to say. I just completely lost my point. That's excellent. I'm winning today.
Let me ask you a question then.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So when you're thinking about using your rankings, and you talked about ADP a little bit, how much do you use your rankings for something like a startup versus ADP? And then when you're talking about your current team or you're talking about trades, like when you're going through different scenarios, how much do you look at your rankings? And I mean, you know your rankings to an extent, but how much do you utilize rankings in general versus ADP versus just honestly looking at your team, you know, and other factors like that?
That's awesome, because that's actually what I was thinking about bringing up next. You just read my mind that I couldn't read. Here's the problem with rankings, and this is I think rankings are wonderful, and you should absolutely subscribe to DLF and use our rankings. I think it's a wonderful tool, but at the same time, I think it's a useless tool. The problem with rankings inherently is, unlike redraft leagues or unlike daily fantasy, where your roster is and its maturity, so to speak, matters more than anything. How close you are to winning a title matters way more than anything. And it can change the value of a player to your team incredibly significantly. So when it comes to making trades or managing my own rosters or anything like that, there have absolutely been instances where, after being offered a trade and either declining it or accepting it, I've realized that my rankings are wrong. That I thought when I made the rankings that I had players a certain way, but then when it came down to brass tacks, that's not really how I feel about the players. You know, you got to put to that litmus test, and it's like, oh Lord, I've been lying to myself and everybody. This isn't right at all. But generally speaking, I don't pay much attention to them. I'm more interested in my roster itself and how it affects things. And that's an important point. I suspect that most people listening to this get that. I know that there's definitely like newer owners or maybe more casual owners that maybe lean on the rankings that we give them a little bit too much. And so this might be kind of a cautionary sort of a thing to say, hey, what you have on your roster matters most. You kind of need to look at the other 24 guys when you're considering how you value that 25th in a trade. I assume, obviously, that you approach things the same way. Yeah,
definitely very similar. I think, like you said, you know, league format, you know, maybe you have different scoring, roster construction, how many spots you have on your roster, how many can you start? Do you need to cut people at the end of the year to make room for rookies and things like that? I mean, all those things can shift the rankings very easily. I like to think of them as these are these are the people I like. You know, number 2 and number 3 may be closer than number 3 and number 4. So you can't use that as an exact science either. But it helps me think about, hey, here's who's kind of in that top tier, who's kind of in that next tier. Who are the guys that I seem to have a preference for, I value higher than the remaining rankers? And I think, you know, for most owners, it's almost easier for them. And I think Scott Fish is actually working on a tool for this for DLF, is to create rankings for individual people. They can go on and do that, but I might edit this out. But I think, you know, someone should create their own rankings and compare them to the rest and see who they're higher or lower on. And that gives them an idea of where they sit, who do they value more. And then that almost, to me, tells me who should I be targeting in trades, because other people aren't quite as keen on that person, versus, oh, this is how much that person's worth.
I don't do that on as grand of a scale as you do, because honestly, it didn't really occur to me, and maybe I should. I suppose I probably do it subconsciously, but I don't seek it out. Now, if I'm in a league with one of the guys that rank on DLF, and I'm in a lot of leagues with a lot of those guys, you better believe it. See what I did there? You better believe that that I check out their rankings before I make them an offer. It can save me time, if nothing else. There's been times where I've gone to offer a guy to somebody, and seeing that they're 30 spots lower on them than I am, and I'm like, I'd be wasting my time if I tried to make this deal right now. You did touch on tiers a bit there. Something else that we do similarly that I just discovered as you were talking and not paying attention is that we use a lot of tiers, more than almost anybody else does. I know that some people might only have 3 tiers for a position, whereas you or I have between maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. When I look at rankings, or when I do rankings, I think tiers are obviously more important to me anyway than the actual rankings themselves. You know, especially aside from maybe the top 10 to 15 guys at receiver, the top 10 or so guys at running back, tight end, and quarterback. Aside from those rankings are pretty tight for me. There's very little from league to league that could change to make me say, oh, I would rather have this guy over this guy. Those are kind of more concrete. Once you get out of those top couple of tiers, especially, I think the way that I really look at my rankings is within the tiers themselves. So if I have a guy ranked as wide receiver 27, like I do Julian Edelman, and then maybe I go down to wide receiver 36, Stephon Diggs. These are guys that are about 10 spots apart, but they're within the same tier. And they're 2 guys, one's 29. I don't know what's Diggs, 22. They're a lot of years apart. And so that's when maybe, depending on where my team is in terms of its maturity, that's when I can say, okay, Edelman and Diggs are really close for me. Even though they're 10 spots apart, they're really close for me when you get that age into it. So I think tiers are kind of an important thing. If you're looking at our rankings and you're trying to use them to maybe help you make decisions, click on our individual names with a little checkbox there, and you can see how we have players tiered. And that might be kind of an additional little Easter egg, I guess, to help you value things.
Well, and it lets you see the comments a lot easier if you input comments too. So, you know, to understand why I put Amari Cooper at 3, you can click on my name at wide receiver and kind of see why. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm the highest on Cooper out of anybody, but I agree with you. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the tiers, and it really helps me kind of think about, even if 2 players, and Edelman and Diggs, I think, is a good example, are similarly they're similarly valuable. It's just they're similarly valuable in different situations. So Edelman is not going to be as valuable for a rebuilding team. Diggs is not going to be quite as valuable for a contending team. So, but overall, I don't think their value is that different. So they should belong in the same tier. It's just being able to look in that tier and say, okay, based on my roster construction, based on everything else, who's going to be better for my team? And that's kind of how I think about it.
Exactly. Excuse me. Exactly. All right. One more thing. I'm going to go a little off script here, but one more thing I just kind of occurred to me looking at my quarterback rankings specifically. This is a good example. When I get outside of maybe the top at quarterback, at the top 15, 16 guys, I kind of change the way I rank players a little bit. And I start to value, especially at the quarterback position or the tight end position, because you're only starting 1 in most leagues, I start to value upside a little bit more. So, for example, I have Tyrod Taylor as my QB 19, and I have Tony Romo as my QB 22, which I think a lot of people probably disagree with. I guess you're even higher on Tyrod than I am, so maybe this is a good discussion to have right here. On a lot of like, if I have only one quarterback on my team, and it has to be Tyrod or Tony Romo, I'm taking Tony Romo on most of my rosters if I'm looking to win a championship. But if we're talking about quarterbacks outside the top 15, so presumably a second quarterback on most fantasy rosters, I'm going to definitely kick guys up with upside. I have Kirk Cousins as my QB 21. Now, would I rather start Kirk Cousins over even Joe Flacco on a team that I want to take to the playoffs? Probably not. But if I have a second or a third quarterback, I'll take a guy that looked like he might be a QB1 this year, when we know for sure under almost any circumstance on earth that that's not Joe Flacco. So I do that with quarterback. I do that with tight end. And as you get further down my wide receiver rankings and you get further down my running back rankings, I think you'll see the same thing. Do you ever consider that when you're doing your rankings?
I do. And I think Tyrod and Romo's a good example. And then there's the inverse, right? You have those young guys who are ranked really highly, like a Jameis Winston or a Marcus Mariota. And then you get to that second quarterback. And then the question becomes, do you take another upside guy, or do you take a veteran like Romo or like Palmer or somebody who's a little later in their career? So you can go either way with it. But yeah, when I get outside of kind of some of the top 10, 15, like you had said, I do start to value upside a little bit more, because I think when you're dealing with guys who are a little older, and Romo maybe isn't the best example, but let's say Alex Smith, right? Alex Smith is consistent, but he's not, there's no eliteness in Alex Smith's game at this point. We know that's not going to change, versus, a Blake Bortles or even a Kirk Cousins to an extent. They still have some progress to make. So you're going to probably value them a little bit higher based on that.
I have Alex Smith after, I believe I have him after RG3 and Colin Kaepernick, if I'm not mistaken, or at least have them right in that same area. Do I believe for a second that either Colin or RG3 is going to outscore Alex Smith over the next couple of seasons? No, I do not. But at the same time, what does Alex Smith really do for your dynasty roster? If you have him on your team, he's like your emergency third string, oh my God, I can't believe I'm starting Alex Smith this week, as opposed to RG3, who theoretically could be a top 5 quarterback. I understand the percentage is really low, but it's a lot higher than the percentage that Alex Smith does it. So it depends. And like you said, if I own, if my only quarterback is Jameis Winston, I'm not owning RG3 on that roster as my I'm not looking to trade for him. I would way rather have Alex Smith. It's not even close. But for most rosters, presumably you have Jameis and somebody like Eli Manning. At that case, yeah, RG3 is my third quarterback. There's no question about it.
All right.
Cool. Want to kick into Rich?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's stop this recording.
Okay. Where'd my window go? I'm so dumb.